Vibe coding is just stupid. Let me tell you why. So welcome to Dave is Not AI. I'm Dave, an AI expert and AI skeptic. So let's get into this. So vibe coding has exploded in popularity across developer communities, quickly becoming a buzzword in today's tech zeitgeist. This approach encourages programmers to trust their instincts and emotions. In other words, what feels good, what feels right to them, rather than adhering strictly to documentation or best practices. A significant factor fueling this trend is the rise of AI-assisted tools. Developers now use AI code assistants not just for speed and efficiency, but to experiment and play, letting generative models shape their projects in real time based on inspirations or vibes. So the question that's getting to me around vibe coding is this any use? In other words, I'm getting clients that are coming to me and say, well, the developers want to get into some vibe coding. Do you know what that is? And should we do it? And that's why I'm looking into it. And here's my opinion on that. And by the way, we've seen trends like this that come along every few years where people are trying to take a different approach to coding. The reason just is picking up interest now is because we have the availability of these AI tools that are able to generate code, and they're able to generate code pretty well. So in other words, people can talk to a prompt or talk to an IVR system and suddenly generate pretty useful, very productive systems directly from that kind of input. No sitting down at the keyboard and coding, Python and C and, all the programming languages out there. You just think it and it happens. And so that's why people feel really powerful. But is this something that's going to be useful? So vibe coding prioritizes personal feelings and AI suggestions over proven efficient software engineering practices. And that's really kind of the bottom line for me. And so in other words, discipline has to be part of building and deploying software. It has to work around the requirements of the business. And we have to turn those requirements into use cases. And we turn those use cases into software systems that are able to solve the problem that we're setting out to solve. And I don't think we can, fake our way through that. And so by leaving those disciplines behind, I think we're going to end up with big messes. So lack of standards in vibe coding and the variability of AI outputs, meaning all over the place, leads directly to unmaintainable and inconsistent code bases. So in other words, if we're not on the same channel in terms of how we're building and deploying code, we're not leveraging standards, we're not putting any discipline in how we're generating these systems, we're going to find that these systems are going to be all over the place and they're going to be unmaintainable at the end of the day. I can build software. I can sit down with ChatGPT and I can generate code and I can run my system. I can generate a website. That's all well and good. But if you're in a professional software development environment, discipline has to be part of that. We have to code to standards. We have to code to best practices. And if we don't, we're going to pass the code to other people that are not going to have any idea what to do with it. And there's no rhyme or reason in terms of how you're coding versus how other developers are coding and how everything kind of exists in this software ecosystem that businesses should maintain. So relying on intuition and on-the-fly AI completions instead of documented requirements is a recipe for scope creep and project failure. So in other words, if we get into the idea that we can consistently change software just based on a whim in terms of our ability to change it, we're not necessarily going to narrow in on a system. In fact, the big question would be, when are we done? And at the end of the day, there has to be a release or something that's released in production. And if we're redoing it and redoing it and redoing it just on our feelings, then ultimately we're not going to have something that we should be releasing at the end of the day. And so I'm just not finding how a vibe coding, kind of process kind of fits into a professional software environment. So vibe coding undermines team collaboration by replacing clear communications with subjective judgment and unpredictable AI input. So at the end of the day, there has to be a coordination, and certainly, DevOps is an example of that, are basically clear communications across development operations, security, governance, things like that, and also the developers. And ultimately, if you're not having that collaboration, everybody is on their own channel, they're, programming to their vibes, so to speak, that's not going to be there. And anybody who works on a software development team knows that that's not good. It increases the risk of hidden technical debt as informal Our AI-generated choices often go unreviewed and untested. So in other words, we're just going and going and going until we feel we have everything we need to build the software. And obviously we can change it exactly from that. So anything that's going to be not addressed or really doesn't get to the core business problems that we're looking to solve, that's going to be technical debt. And so in other words, your vibes may not match up with the requirements of the business, I guess what I'm saying at the end of the day. And therefore, someone's going to have to come back and fix that. So you're going to end up developing the system twice. And I don't think that's a good idea. So the approach ignores the necessity of professional development, which AI-generated vibes can obscure. Developers are talented people, and I think we have a tendency every few years to threaten their jobs, with AI and, code generators, by the way, are nothing new. We've had AI-based code generators for a long time. Now we have some pretty good technology that can generate some pretty good code. In many cases, it can be superior to some of the code that humans can write. And so I'm not knocking the AI tools. But at the end of the day, we have to have the ability to reproduce these systems, and we have to have accountability, because if we're pushing this out in a business environment, then they're going to be risking their business based on the functionality of the software. And if something's getting them away from standards or getting away from disciplines, that's going to put the business at risk. And so most businesses are saying no to vibe coding. I agree with them. I think it's a nice distraction. It's cute to talk about. It's a great conference presentation, but not necessarily is going to have any business value. And I think in many cases, it's going to diminish businesses from their value, because some of these developers, instead of working to the discipline of building systems that are going to solve the problems of the business, are off using AI in this way to, code to whatever their, hearts and whims are stating. And you can't work that way. Ultimately, vibe coding is a shortcut that sacrifices quality and reliability for fleeting personal satisfaction and a trendy AI novelty at the end of the day. So I understand why it's interesting to do that. I play around with LLMs all the time, and you can have it write things for you and, write a website and, help you with a database design, things like that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't generate something that's going to be very useful in terms of a system that's going to be repeating behavior and over again. So you got to remember, in writing software, we're writing it directly from the requirements, and it's repeating some sort of behavior over and over again in a sequence and in procedures that we're defining it to do. If we don't have a good handle on that as to what it is, it's not going to be useful. We found that out with code generators when they first came out. I remember people declaring developers dead. This is 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And we found that the code generators, when they wrote the code, and we bought into the hype as well, and this is in my developer days, wasn't useful, didn't generate anything that was efficient, had no standards in it, and basically it wasn't able to solve the problems of the business. Now, AI is able to do a much better job than the code generators of 20 years ago. I'm not knocking it. But at the end of the day, we need human control, we need accountability, and we need repeatability in the ability to deliver systems that solve business problems. And I know I sound like a broken record, but why is that controversial? And vibe coding obviously doesn't do that, because it just goes to whatever trends and whatever feelings come into the head of the developer who's, talking into an IVR system or typing something into a prompt. And it's cool, I give it that, but it's not necessarily going to add value to the business. I think in many cases, it's going to be a deficit for the business, because instead of working on the real stuff, these developers are off doing this. Well, anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. I realize that everybody may not agree with me here, and I understand that. But, tell me if you do vibe coding, how it works. How are you making it work in your environment? Or if you agree with me that it's a distraction and something that's a bit silly, then let me know that as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other videos on this channel. Also, check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course, my generative AI architecture course out on GoCloudCareers. And finally, my latest book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. Later.